I heard the crack before I saw what happened. That sound, metal shearing through bolt threads, it's something you never forget once you've heard it in combat. My grandson Derek was 3 feet ahead of me on the narrow hiking trail, and suddenly he wasn't there anymore. Time does a strange thing when someone you love is in danger. Everything slows down, details become sharp as broken glass. I saw his hand reach out, fingers grasping at nothing. I saw the dust puff up where his boots had been planted a second before. I saw the railing that should have held him, swinging loose, dangling over the cliff edge like a broken promise. I was moving before my brain finished processing what happened. 64 years old, and my body remembered things my mind had tried to forget. I dropped to my stomach and slid toward the edge, my hand shooting out into empty space. My fingers closed around fabric, his jacket, and I felt the full weight of him jerk against my grip. The impact drove my shoulder into the rocky ground, but I held on. Derek's face, white with shock, stared up at me from 20 feet below. He'd managed to catch himself on a narrow ledge, but I could see his feet sliding on loose scree. Below him, the cliff dropped another 200 feet into a boulder-strewn ravine. "Grandpa," he gasped, "don't let go." "Never," I said, and I meant it. That's when I heard the voice behind me. Sweet, concerned, perfectly calculated. "Oh my God, Thomas, Derek." My grandson's girlfriend, Melissa, rushed forward, her boyfriend Marcus right behind her. They'd been hiking behind us, supposedly taking photos of the autumn colors in the Rockies. What happened? I looked up at them, and something in my gut, the same instinct that had kept me alive through 2 tours in Afghanistan, told me to be very careful about what I said next. "The railing gave out," I said, keeping my voice steady despite the strain in my arm. Derek was 6 feet tall and solid muscle. I had him by the jacket, but I needed to pull him up onto that ledge he'd caught, get him secure before my old man's grip failed. "Marcus, I need you to grab my belt and brace me. I'm going to pull him up to that ledge." Marcus moved forward, but something about his movements was wrong. Too slow, too careful. He was looking at the dangling railing, at me holding Derek, and I saw something flicker across his face. It wasn't shock or concern. It was calculation. "Actually," Marcus said, stopping a few feet away, "maybe we should wait for help. You might make things worse if you're not trained in rescue situations." "I was a combat engineer for 23 years, I said flatly. "I've extracted wounded soldiers from worse situations than this. Now grab my belt. Marcus, help him." Melissa's voice was shrill, but when I glanced at her, her eyes were locked on Marcus, not on Derek. They were communicating something I couldn't quite read. That's when I felt it, the fabric of Derek's jacket starting to tear under the strain. I didn't have time to play games with these two. Using a technique I'd learned in a mountain warfare course 30 years ago, I shifted my weight and pulled Derek up in one smooth motion. He scrambled, found purchase on the ledge, and I guided him to a more secure position where he could brace against the cliff face. "Okay, Derek, listen to me," I said, keeping my voice calm. "You're going to traverse left about 6 feet. There's a crack in the rock face you can use as a handhold. Work your way back to where the trail widens, where the railing's still intact." Derek's breath came in short gasps, but he nodded. He'd been rock climbing since he was 12. He knew what to do. As he started to move, I pulled myself back from the edge and stood up, my shoulders screaming in protest. That's when I really looked at Melissa and Marcus. They were standing too far away. They hadn't moved to help. And Melissa was gripping Marcus's arm with white-knuckled force, her face a mask of barely controlled panic. My mind worked fast, piecing together observations I'd been filing away for the past 3 days of this hiking trip. The way Marcus had suggested this particular trail, remote, difficult, with several dangerous sections. The way Melissa had insisted Derek go first on the narrow parts. The life insurance policy Derek had mentioned casually over dinner 2 nights ago. The one Melissa had encouraged him to increase last month, naming her as beneficiary. And most damning of all, the way I'd seen Marcus examining that railing early this morning when he thought I was still in my tent. I'd watched him through the mesh window, thinking he was just being cautious. But now I understood. He'd been checking his work. Derek made it back to safe ground, his chest heaving. He looked at me with something like awe. "Grandpa, you saved my life." "That's what family does," I said. Then I turned to face Melissa and Marcus. Funny thing about that railing. I inspected every section of this trail when we started up this morning. Old habit from my engineering days. That railing was solid. Marcus's expression didn't change, but Melissa's did. Just for a second, fear flashed across her face. "Well, it obviously wasn't solid," Marcus said smoothly. "These mountain trails, maintenance isn't always up to standard. Derek's lucky you have fast reflexes, Thomas." "Luck had nothing to do with it," I said quietly. "Training, maybe. Preparation, definitely. You know what else I learned in the military? how to recognize a tactical situation, how to read an enemy's movements. Enemy? Melissa laughed, but it sounded forced. Thomas, you're in shock. We should get Derek down the mountain, get him checked out. That's actually a good idea, I said. But first, Marcus, I need to ask you something. Why were you examining that railing this morning? Around 0600 hours, before the sun was fully up, Marcus went very still. Derek looked between us, confused. What are you talking about? Derek asked. I'm talking about the fact that someone loosened the bolts on that railing, I said, watching Marcus's face carefully. Someone who knew we'd be passing this way, knew Derek would be in front. Someone who knew that if Derek went over the edge, on this particular section, help would be hours away. Someone who stood to gain something from Derek's death. That's insane, Melissa said, but her voice cracked. Derek, your grandfather is standing right here, I interrupted, with eyes that still work fine. And I saw what I saw, Marcus. The silence that followed was broken only by the wind whistling through the pines and Derek's labored breathing. Then Marcus's expression changed. The helpful concern melted away, replaced by something cold and calculating. He looked at Melissa, then back at me. You're a smart old man, he said. Too smart for your own good. Everything happened fast after that. Marcus lunged forward, but his goal wasn't me, it was Derek, still shaken from his near-death experience. But I'd spent 23 years training for exactly this kind of moment. My body moved on instinct, stepping between them. Marcus was 30 years younger and built like someone who spent a lot of time in the gym, but I'd been in actual combat. There's a difference between looking strong and being dangerous. I caught his wrist, twisted, and used his own momentum to send him stumbling past me. He crashed into the very railing he'd sabotaged, and it gave way completely. For one heart-stopping moment, I thought he'd go over, but he caught himself on the rock face, just as Derek had. Except I had no intention of saving him. Grandpa, what the hell? Derek was staring at me like I'd lost my mind. Melissa, I said, not taking my eyes off Marcus as he struggled to pull himself back up. You're going to want to start talking. Because attempted murder carries a significant sentence in Canada, and right now you're looking at being an accessory. Her face crumpled. I didn't want to. Marcus said it would be quick, that Derek wouldn't suffer. He said we could be together, that we'd have the insurance money to start over. He said, shut up, Marcus snarled from his precarious position, but he was too busy trying not to fall to stop her. He planned it all, Melissa sobbed. The trail, the timing. He said you were old, that you wouldn't notice. But when you grabbed Derek, when you saved him, I realized. She looked at me with something like horror. Who are you? I'm someone who taught his grandson to always check his equipment, to always have a backup plan, and to never, ever trust someone who tries to isolate you from the people who love you, I said. I reached into my jacket and pulled out my phone not to make a call, but to stop the recording I'd started the moment I sensed something was wrong. I'm also someone who learned a long time ago to always gather evidence. Derek's eyes widened. You recorded everything? From the moment your girlfriend started acting strange, I confirmed. And before you ask, yes, I had my suspicions. I didn't want to believe them. I hoped I was wrong. But when I saw Marcus checking that railing this morning, I knew I had to be prepared. Marcus finally hauled himself back onto solid ground. He lay there, breathing hard, looking between me and his phone, which I'd already kicked away from him. You're not going to get away with this, he gasped. I already have, I said calmly. I pulled out a second device from my pocket, an emergency GPS beacon, military grade, something I'd carried on every deployment and every hike since I retired. I activated this 20 minutes ago, right after Derek went over the edge. Search and rescue is probably 15 minutes out, along with the RCMP. They'll be very interested in hearing this recording, and in examining that railing for tool marks. The color drained from Marcus's face. Melissa was openly crying now. Derek walked over to stand beside me, still processing everything. The insurance policy. You knew about that? You mentioned it at dinner. Seemed odd that Melissa was so keen on you, increasing it, naming her as the sole beneficiary. You've only been together 6 months. I looked at my grandson with something between disappointment and sympathy, but I didn't want to interfere in your relationship. I thought maybe I was being paranoid. Old man seeing ghosts in every shadow. You weren't paranoid, Derek said quietly. You were right. We heard the helicopter before we saw it, the distinctive whump-whump of rotor blades echoing off the mountain peaks. Search and rescue, followed by a second helicopter carrying RCMP officers. They'd taken my emergency beacon signal seriously. As the helicopters landed in a clearing 50 meters down the trail, I put my hand on Derek's shoulder. There's something you need to understand. This isn't just about them being caught and you being safe. This is about the choices we make, about who we trust, and why. Derek nodded, his jaw tight. You're a good young man, I continued. Smart, kind, successful. Those are things that attract the right kind of people, but they also attract predators. People who see you as a mark, an opportunity. Melissa wasn't looking for love. She was looking for a payday. How do you know? Derek asked. How do you spot people like that? Experience, mostly, and paying attention to inconsistencies. The way she pushed you to increase that policy but never wanted to talk about long-term plans. The way she isolated you from your friends, made excuses whenever you wanted to introduce her to family. The way Marcus showed up at just the right time to support her. I paused. But most of all, I trusted my instincts. Something felt wrong, even when I couldn't put my finger on exactly what. The RCMP officers were climbing up toward us now, with search and rescue medics close behind. I almost died today, Derek said, his voice hollow. But you didn't. You're alive because you kept your head, because you've been training for years in rock climbing, and because I was there to help. I squeezed his shoulder. The person you need to be maddest at isn't them, it's yourself. For ignoring the warning signs. He looked at me sharply. That's harsh, Grandpa. It's true. Melissa was showing you who she was. You just didn't want to see it. None of us want to believe that someone we care about would hurt us. But the world has dangerous people in it, Derek. People who smile while planning to destroy you. The lesson here isn't to become paranoid and trust no one. It's to pay attention, to listen when something feels off, to value the people who've been in your corner for years over someone who showed up 6 months ago promising everything you ever wanted. The officers reached us, and everything became official. Statements were taken. Evidence was collected. Marcus and Melissa were read their rights and taken into custody. Marcus on attempted murder charges. Melissa as an accessory and co-conspirator. The recording I'd made was handed over, along with my testimony about the sabotaged railing. Derek was checked over by the medics. Bumps and bruises, some scrapes, minor shock, but otherwise unharmed. They wanted to take him down in the helicopter, but he refused. I'm walking down with my grandfather, he said firmly. So we did. We took the long trail down, the safe trail, with 2 RCMP officers accompanying us as witnesses and protection. It was almost sunset by the time we reached the base. During that walk, Derek was quiet for a long time. Then he asked, "Did you really suspect something from the beginning?" "Not from the very beginning," I admitted. "But once she started pushing for changes to your life, the insurance, moving away from your friends, limiting your contact with family, that's when alarm bells started ringing. I wanted to give her the benefit of the doubt. I wanted to believe you'd found someone good. But I also knew I needed to be watchful. That's why you insisted on coming on this trip." "That's why I insisted on coming on this trip," I confirmed. "And why I stayed sober when Marcus was encouraging everyone to drink heavily last night. Why I got up early to scout the trail. Why I kept my phone recording in my pocket." "You're like some kind of spy," Derek said with a weak laugh. "I'm a grandfather who loves his grandson," I corrected, "who spent enough years in dangerous situations to recognize the signs. Who knows that the worst threats often come from people who smile and pretend to love you." We walked in silence for a while longer. Then Derek said, "Teach me." "Teach you what?" "How to see it. How to protect myself. How to be more like you." I stopped walking and turned to face him. The setting sun cast long shadows across his face, making him look older than his 31 years. "You don't need to be like me," I said gently. "You need to be yourself, but wiser, more cautious, less willing to ignore your instincts just because you want something to be true." I paused. The military taught me a lot about survival, about reading situations and people. But the most important lesson wasn't tactical. It was this. Trust is earned over time, not given freely to anyone who asks for it. Real love is patient. Real relationships can withstand scrutiny. If someone is rushing you, isolating you, asking you to make major decisions quickly, that's a red flag the size of a billboard. Derek nodded slowly. "I feel so stupid." "Don't. Predators are good at what they do. They're practiced. They know how to find vulnerable spots and exploit them. Melissa knew you were lonely after your last relationship ended. She knew you wanted to believe in love again. She used that against you." I started walking again, and Derek fell into step beside me. "The question isn't why you didn't see it. The question is what you'll do differently next time." "Next time," Derek repeated, like the words tasted bitter. "I don't know if there should be a next time." "There should be," I said firmly. "There are good people out there, Derek. People who will love you for who you are, not what you can give them. Your grandmother, my late wife, she was one of those people. She taught me what real partnership looks like. Equal sacrifice, mutual respect, and love that doesn't come with conditions or price tags." "I miss Grandma," Derek said quietly. "I do too. Every day. But she'd tell you the same thing I'm telling you now. Don't let one bad person make you distrust everyone. Let this experience make you wiser, not harder. By the time we reached the parking area, it was dark. News crews were there. Word had spread about the attempted murder on the mountain trail. Derek's mother, my daughter Sarah, was there too. She'd driven 4 hours from Edmonton the moment she'd heard. She grabbed Derek in a fierce hug, then turned to me. "Dad, they said you saved his life." "I did what needed doing," I said simply. "He did more than that," Derek said, his voice stronger now. "He protected me when I wouldn't protect myself. He saw what I couldn't see." Sarah looked at me with tears in her eyes. "Thank you." "Don't thank me," I said. "Just help him learn from this. We all need to be more careful about who we let into our inner circles, more willing to ask hard questions, more ready to walk away when something doesn't feel right." The criminal trial took place 8 months later. By then, investigators had uncovered the full extent of Marcus and Melissa's plan. Marcus had a history, 2 previous relationships that had ended with suspicious accidents, though nothing could be proven. Melissa had debts she'd hidden from Derek, over $60,000 worth. Together, they'd planned to collect Derek's $300,000 life insurance policy, split it, and disappear. The recording I'd made was played in court. Melissa's breakdown on the mountain, admitting to the plan. Marcus's cold calculation when he lunged for Derek. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours. Marcus was sentenced to 25 years for attempted murder. Melissa received 15 years as an accessory and co-conspirator. Derek's victim impact statement was powerful. He talked about trust, about love, about the violation of having someone you care about try to kill you for money. After the sentencing, reporters asked me how I'd known something was wrong. I told them the truth. Decades of training, years of experience, and a grandfather's love that made me pay attention when something felt off. But here's what I didn't tell them, what I saved for Derek during a quiet dinner after the trial ended. "The world has always been dangerous," I said, cutting into my steak. "There have always been people willing to hurt others for gain. But there have also always been people willing to stand between the predators and their intended victims. That's what family is for. That's what love does, real love. It protects, it warns, it acts." "You make it sound like everyone needs a military-trained grandfather watching their back," Derek said with a small smile. He'd been in therapy for months, working through the trauma and the betrayal. He was getting better, stronger, but the scars were still fresh. "No," I said. "Everyone needs someone who loves them enough to tell them hard truths. Someone who won't stay silent when they see danger. Someone who will act when action is needed." I set down my fork and looked at him directly, but mostly, everyone needs to be that person for themselves. To trust their own instincts, to value their own safety over someone else's approval, to remember that real love never requires you to be less careful, less protected, or less valued. Derek was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "I met someone." My eyebrows rose. "Oh? She's a teacher. We met at a community center where I volunteer. We've been taking it slow, very slow. And Grandpa," he looked at me with something like hope mixed with fear, "I'd like you to meet her, to tell me if you see any red flags." I felt something warm bloom in my chest. Not because he wanted my approval, but because he was asking the right questions, being cautious, valuing his own safety enough to seek a second opinion. "I'd be honored," I said. "But Derek, ultimately, you need to trust yourself. I can tell you what I see, but you're the one who has to make the choice." "I know," he said, "but it helps to have backup, to have someone watching who knows what to look for. Always," I promised. That's what family does. Now, 2 years later, Derek is engaged to that teacher Amanda, a woman with a kind heart and a sharp mind who loves Derek for who he is, not what he can provide. I've watched their relationship develop with the careful eye of someone who knows what to look for, and I've seen nothing but genuine care, equal partnership, and mutual respect. Marcus is still in prison. Melissa was released last month on parole and moved to Ontario. Derek's life insurance policy has been cancelled. He decided he didn't need one until he had children to provide for. He's happy, careful, and wiser than he was. As for me, I'm still the same old man who wakes up early, pays attention to details, and trusts his instincts. But I'm also a grandfather who sleeps better at night knowing his grandson learned the most important lesson I could teach him. Safety isn't paranoia. Caution isn't weakness. And love, real love, never asks you to make yourself vulnerable to danger. The mountains are still there, beautiful and dangerous. Derek still hikes them, but now he checks every piece of equipment twice. He pays attention to who suggests which trails and why. He trusts, but he verifies. That's all any of us can do. Stay alert, trust our instincts, protect the people we love, and remember that sometimes the most important skills have nothing to do with combat or tactics. Sometimes survival is as simple as paying attention asking questions, and being willing to act when you see someone you love walking toward danger. I taught Derek to be careful. The mountain taught him why that matters. And together, we made sure he survived to learn both lessons. That's what family does. That's what love means. And that's a truth worth more than any insurance policy, any amount of money, or any false promise of security from someone who smiles while planning your destruction. Stay vigilant, trust wisely, love carefully, and always, always listen when someone who truly loves you says something doesn't feel right. Because sometimes that warning is the only thing standing between you and a 200-foot drop into darkness.
When our team read this story, we had to pause, then read it again. Because some betrayals are so calculated, so cruel that you wonder how someone could live with themselves. This story was sent to us from a man in Seattle, Washington. These are his words. My wife told me she was pregnant with our first child. I was the happiest man alive, until the DNA test proved the baby wasn't mine. And I made sure everyone knew whose it was. I'm 37 years old. I was married for 8 years. Let's call my ex-wife Sarah. We met when I was 27. She was 25, working as an executive assistant. I was in sales at a tech company. We dated for 2 years, got married. Bought a small house, talked about kids constantly. But month after month, nothing happened. We tried for 3 years. Sarah started getting frustrated, upset, said maybe it wasn't meant to be. I suggested we see a doctor, get tested. She refused, said she didn't want to know if something was wrong. I respected that. We kept trying. Then 2 years ago, everything changed. Sarah got a new job, executive assistant to the CEO of a software company. Guy named Marcus, 42, divorced. Wealthy, she was excited, better pay, better title, better office. She started working late, coming home at 8, 9 p.m., weekend work. Emergency meetings, business dinners, I didn't mind. She was building her career, I supported it. Then 6 months into the new job, Sarah came home one night, crying happy tears. What's wrong? I asked. She handed me something, a pregnancy test. Positive, I'm pregnant, she said. I lost it. Started crying, picked her up, spun her around. We'd been trying for 5 years, 5 years of hoping, waiting, and finally, we told everyone, our families, our friends, posted on social media. Everyone was so happy for us. Sarah's pregnancy went smoothly. Morning sickness, cravings, all normal. We started preparing, painted the nursery, bought furniture, picked names. I was at every appointment, every ultrasound. Saw our baby on the screen, a boy. We were having a son, I couldn't wait, but around month 7 I started noticing things. Sarah was on her phone constantly, texting, smiling. Then hiding the screen when I walked in. She'd take calls in another room. Come back acting normal. One night I asked who she was texting so much. Work stuff, she said. Marcus needs updates on projects. At 10 p.m. he works late, she said. You know that, I let it go. Didn't want to stress her while pregnant. Then one Saturday, Sarah said she had to go into the office. Emergency situation, she left at noon, said she'd be back by 4. 6 p.m. No Sarah. 7 p.m. I texted, no response. 8 p.m. I called, voicemail. 9 p.m. she walked in. Sorry, she said. It took longer than expected. I nodded.